Michael here, and in this video journal, the bindings part 1, I will install the bindings on the 3-piece walnut build that I've been working on. So keep watching. Well, I have my body all sanded down to about 220, ready for the next step, which will be the binding process. There's two things I do before I start the binding. One is to put a wash coat of shellac on the instrument. Before I do that, though, I want to protect my insides by just placing some little plastic caps to cover my sound hole and my sound port. So that makes it really easy to protect those areas. I'm going to start with my back, and I'm using just shellac cut with a little denatured alcohol. This is a non-waxed shellac. And the shellac will help seal the wood. And in my binding process, after I cut the binding channel out, I do use masking tape to help hold the binding on. And when I take the masking tape off, the wash coat of shellac helps the wood to not chip out or splinter up as I remove the masking tape. So it serves a couple of purposes. Also kind of gives you an idea of what your finished guitar is going to look like, because it really makes the grain pop. And it'll show you also any little areas where you need to do some more sanding. And my top has some abalone inlay and some koa around the outside. And I don't know if that's going to bleed or not on the spruce. So what I'm going to do on the top, just around that rosette and that sound hole area, is I'm just going to use some spray shellac that will, I'm not dragging a pad across there. Hopefully it will keep it from bleeding. And then I'm going to take a fresh pad because I don't want any of the stain that's left on that pad, and go ahead and do the rest of the top. Well, it's time to start working on bindings now that I've got the box closed and I put a wash coat of shellac over the body all the way around. The first thing I want to do is to cut and rat out the channel for the arm bevel block binding. So when I bent my bindings, I bent 5 pieces for each build, and I'll need to cut this one and use this little section here to go into where the arm bevel binding will be. In order to position my binding for the arm bevel, I needed to take and continue the lines of the curvature of my side that I cut out for the arm bevel. So I'm going to use the same little template that I used originally and just kind of lay it on here, position it, and then continue that line all the way till it meets the top, which I've actually already done on this guitar. And I'm going to put it on some little risers because I'm going to have to clamp a guide to the top. The next step is to go ahead and figure out exactly where that binding is going to be, and I have a little template I've made to do that. I'll just line this up with my marks on where that arm bevel angle meets the top on each end, and I've drawn the line there, and this is where the binding strip will go in. This is a template guide to guide my little router to wrap this out, and I'm actually going to use just a little Dremel with a round base on it, and I have a 3/32 of an inch downcut bit mounted in there. And I just need to go ahead and line my template up so that my router bit will follow that line all the way around. I've aligned my router guide so that my bit will follow the pencil mark that I've made on my top. all the way around. And now it's just a matter of routing it out a little bit at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and okay, now I can clean my line up just a little bit with some sandpaper and then cut my binding strip to fit in there. Well, I've cut a little strip of my binding that I'm going to be using on this build and fitted it here to the little channel that I just routed out. So the next thing I'm going to do is just sort of go ahead and glue it in. Now this back portion of the R-bevel will be carved away, so I really want to make sure that my binding is pressed flush up against this face here. So I'm just going to use some little wedges in here. Okay, now when that dries, I can go ahead and trim that down, and then I can go ahead and start routing my channels for the bindings for the rest of the top and the back. Well, the arm bevel binding inlay has dried, so I can go ahead and take it all apart right now. And next I'm just going to trim it down. And then take my little razor saw here and go ahead and trim this last little bit here right at the end as well. And I need to go ahead and sand this down flush, because the next step is going to be cutting the channel for the binding all the way around the rest of the instrument, and I need to be able to get in there smoothly. And I need to go ahead and put a little bit more shellac on there, since I've sanded most of that off. Okay, now that I've gotten the binding for the R-bevel location on, it is time to go ahead and start the binding process on the rest of the instrument. Well, with the arm bevel binding installed, it's time to go ahead and start cutting the channels for the rest of the binding on the back and on the top on this build. The first thing I want to do, I'm going to do the back first. I want to mount my body onto this little sled that will allow me to slide it around in my router jig over here. So very carefully, without poking something into the top, I'm going to mount this body. And when I mount it in here, I want to make sure that I can get it as square as I can. Okay, now I can go over here to my router and start routing. With my body mounted on the sled, it's time to go ahead and start cutting the channels for the bindings. And before I take it off the sled, moving everything out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and just fit a little piece of binding in it, make sure it fits properly. Okay, we're good to go. Well, with my body repositioned in the mold with the top up and tightly secured into the sled, let's go ahead and time to route the top channels. Okay, I've got the top channel routed out for the binding and the bottom, so I can go ahead and take this out of the sled and start working on gluing the bindings in. Well, I have actually gone ahead and glued on the binding on the top and on one side of the back. And just to show you how that process goes, I've taken the last piece of binding that's going to go on this body and carefully fitted it lengthwise. And hopefully I've cut it just right so I won't have a big gap or won't have to trim down here at the bottom. And then one thing that I do when I put my binding on is I take a piece of sandpaper and I just kill or round over this sharp edge on the bottom just to make sure I get a good tight fit all the way against the body all the way around. And then just a small brush to clean out the channel. And I can start putting some glue on here now. And then with my little paintbrush, I just kind of spread it around to make sure the entire channel is covered in glue. Okay. With my binding piece, I'm going to start tight here at the top. And then just a little something here to hold it up. And so I'm pressing in and down as I go. And applying just a little piece of tape. Okay, now I've got it kind of positioned on there. that tape is not actually the product that's going to clamp that in place. For that I'm using a band clamp type device. Okay, then I'm just going to tie it off. Alright. Once that dries, I'll take it off and then I can sand the binding down flush all the way around. Well, it's been a few hours and the binding has had time to dry, so I'm going to go ahead and undo the strapping. Okay, so here's the 3-piece walnut. It's been fully bound with some curly coa binding, some sapelli engraft wood, okay. Now right down here, I've got a little bit of the binding that has not gotten pressed down hard enough to push all the way in there. It's a real simple fix for this. Put a little water on it. And take a hot iron. And simply iron it in place. The heat from the iron will soften the glue enough for me to push it back into place and hold it there until the glue sets again. Okay, so this body now is ready for me to sand down. I need to sand the binding down flush with the top and with the sides all the way around. Then I can start working on carving out my arm bevel. And then the last step will be to go ahead and put the arm bevel veneer on. Well, that concludes this video journal on the bindings part 1. I've gotten the bindings installed and sanded them down. Next time I'll start working on the arm bevel block. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe, hit the notification icon, and if you'd like to support the channel, there's a link down below where you can do that. And thank y'all so much for watching.